Hello again, everybody, and welcome to the Keith Costas podcast. I'm your host, Bob Ramsey, and alongside, of course, is the star of the show, MLB Network analyst Keith Costas. Keith, how you doing? It's been a very interesting week since we last spoke.
Yeah, all good, Rammer. I was out here, or still am out here in San Francisco. Took in a little bit of that Brewers Giants series. We did the game yesterday afternoon, so always good to be back on the road with how the last year or so has been, and seeing some good baseball too.
Step back and take an overview of that series. When the series began, it was two division leaders. Things changed a little bit. Tell me what you took from that matchup.
Well, it's kind of interesting, Rammer. Sometimes preparing for these national broadcasts, I mean, you know how baseball is. The beauty of baseball is following the 162. It's not football. It's hard to gear up for one specific game. But this week did feel a little different coming out to San Francisco because you had Giants Brewers leading into Giants Dodgers, and you look at those two series and how they've played out so far this season, it's almost impossible to separate those teams based on, obviously the records are very close, but the head-to-head, I was blown away when I started looking back at how the season had gone. I mean, that first series, Giants Brewers, there was one inning where they were separated by more than 2 runs, and I think only 2 other innings where they were separated by more than 1 run. They played 30 innings, 27 of them were either tied or a 1-run game. So you come in thinking, this is going to be another, knockdown, drag-out type of fight like that. And the Giants didn't ever have a lead in the first 3 games, and the Brewers were threatening to sweep a 4-game set. So the Giants were kind of on their heels a little bit. And, something that's popping up around the league, it's like, obviously we all know that the virus is still out there, but some of these untimely COVID situations, the teams that are in the race are dealing with, that kind of bit the Giants in the beginning of the series, having to scratch Wood and Cueto. Cueto came back and pitched in game 2, but Wood is actually down for the count with COVID here. So,
wow.
It was a little bit of a knock them on their heels type of situation early in the week for the Giants. And it had that tone going in too, even though it's been close. We've talked a couple times throughout the year, and I think most baseball fans would agree that there's just been this sentiment for as good as the Giants have been, that eventually time is going to run out on them and the Dodgers will assert themselves. And that's basically how it's played out so far this week. We'll see how it plays out this weekend, Dodgers-Giants. But, yeah, that Brewers-Giants series was very entertaining. Yesterday's game, the one we actually did, was a really good, crisp game. Logan Webb, I don't know how much people not on the West Coast are locked in on this guy, but he threw an absolute gem for the Giants yesterday, and 14 in a row now that he's given up 2 or fewer runs. He's closing in on a franchise record, which surprised me. You got to go back to the early 1900s. A gentleman named Ferdy Shupp. I don't think anybody watching this remembers his work on the mound.
I roomed with him on the road.
Right, exactly. Born in 1891. I don't know if you guys are in the same graduating class or not, but I'm glad you remember him. But yeah, Logan Webb was great yesterday. Had 21 swings and misses, which is the most by any Giant this year. So while I say that their staff is kind of banged up, that's definitely true. Gossman has kind of struggled lately, and some of the guys that carried him early in the season are not pitching like they did in the first half. But Webb steps up and is pitching as well as anybody in the game. So they salvage 1 win and head into this big series with the Dodgers this weekend that should be great.
We definitely want to break that down, the 2 West Coast series that are big, but let's hold that to the end and take a look at these division and wild card races as everybody, including us, is trying to get into that handicap thing. And I'm like everybody else. I look at so-called strength of schedule, who you're facing. And I'll be interested to see how much that is a factor down the stretch, because as I look at the teams that I kind of like and the teams that have that so-called softer schedule, sometimes they're dealing with internal things. Let me focus particularly on the Philadelphia Phillies. I like them a lot. I thought they might be that kind of sleeper team. I saw their schedule. They were starting to hit. But they lose their cleanup hitter. And my theory has always been, in almost in every sport, Keith, that when a key element of your team goes down, there is almost always sort of a rallying point around that issue. But there is a shelf life for that. The thing you don't know is, do you pick up and pick up the dropped flag and rally forward for a game or 2 or a week? Sometimes you can do it for a month, but eventually, unless it's Lou Gehrig and Wally Pipp, eventually the reason the guy was a starting player and a key player, and the bench guys are the bench guys, that'll come to fore, and you'll see why you're missing him. So I look at Hoskins and I look at the Phillies in particular. They're trying to cover up that hole with St. Louis kid, Vierling, Real Muto playing some at first base with the other guy catching, Brad Miller, all nice players. But does that really fill your cleanup hole? Does Andrew McCutchen say, okay, rally around me, boys? So where I want to, a week or two ago, I was saying, watch the Phillies. They're going to make a run. I don't know now. So how do you see that situation?
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head with where you started there with the strength of schedule and everything, because you look on the surface and the Phillies have won, I think 6 in a row at this point, and they do have the easiest remaining schedule. So that lines up to be an easy pick, kind of what we're talking about. But I'm totally with you, and I agree with your theory that kind of applies across the board to sports. And you look at Hoskins in particular, I know that maybe his traditional numbers at times don't look great, his batting average and whatnot, but this guy sees a ton of pitches. He's got a steady, consistent plate approach. So even if he's not necessarily putting hits on the board, that's a guy that's going to work the opposing pitcher. He's going to see lots and lots of pitches. He's going to give you good at-bats. So he has a steadiness to him, even when he's not necessarily producing in the hit column, that's going to show up more often than not. So that's a big loss for them. I don't know, though, with Joe Girardi, and it's kind of ironic. I mean, we're talking about them having a manager that could change the way things have played out for them down the stretch. And then you look at the guy who he replaced, and he's going to win Manager of the Year in San Francisco. So was the manager really their problem? Was it the team makeup that was their problem this last handful of years that they collapsed down the stretch? Hard to say. But I do like Joe, and I'm biased from having worked with him at the network, but I do like having Joe in that seat in September to kind of help them get through this thing.
Yeah.
And who knows? The Braves are, for as well as they've played these last handful of weeks to kind of assert themselves after struggling to get over 500. I've been looking at the Phillies only in the wild card race, but they're only 2 back of the Braves. So that division really hasn't been able, outside of that handful of a little stretch from the Braves there where they did take things over, that division really hasn't been able to gain any kind of traction throughout the year. So while I'm with you that the Phillies might be trending in the wrong direction, that division has proven time and time again that the top of the standings is not going to get away from anybody. So they could be in better shape, actually, for the division than some of these teams. Who knows? Maybe the Padres turn a corner and get back to the way they were playing. I don't think so when you look at how things have played out for them recently. But, yeah, I think the Phillies do have some concerns, but playing in that division is a pretty significant silver lining to me when you look at Philadelphia.
Yeah, so let's transition into talking about the both wild cards, starting with the National League. I know a lot of the national guys, of which you're one, have kind of gone soft on the Cardinals. They've slipped down to like 5th in that wild card, but only 2 games out of that second spot. I still believe that is all wide open, and I think it's going to be fascinating. The Reds, not unlike the Phillies, they are just not the same without Winker in that lineup.
Yes.
And is that coincidental or is it real? We're going to find out here in the next week.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I think you look at some of that narrative around the Cardinals, they haven't done themselves any favors with some of these series that they've dropped recently. So I get it. I'm not making excuses for them, but I do think a lot of that is based on that kind of 10,000-foot view. You look at the standings, you look at these odds, we're as guilty of it as anybody. We look at these playoff odds that are completely formula and mathematically based every day, and it's a jumping off point for conversations, and that's all good. I think people understand it's not the be-all, end-all, but sometimes you do lose sight of just exactly how those formulas affect what the predictions are, and you just hit the nail on the head with your last comments talking about the Phillies. For the Cardinals, a lot of that's based on them having one of the harder schedules left. But I don't think if you watch the Cardinals all year, and if they get healthy, and if Wainwright's pitching the way he's been pitching, they can compete in these series. I mean, the fact that they have 10 games left with the Brewers is a huge driving factor in all of these websites and these odds and these prognosticators thinking that they have absolutely no chance. But it's right there for them for the taking. I mean, I think that the Cardinals, for as frustrating as this series or the season has been for fans, they're back where they always are, playing meaningful baseball in September. So this idea that they're just going to wilt because the schedule says that they're supposed to be underdogs in the sport where it's almost impossible to predict what's going to happen day to day is just, it's kind of like what we were talking about with the Giants and Brewers series. It's not often in baseball that you have it all right in front of you and you say, here it is. You kind of have to usually take a step back and say, well, we'll see how it all plays out. But it's right there for the Cardinals in front of them. So I don't know why anybody would think it's anything other than wide open, considering the amount of time left and where they are. They've put themselves in position to have a good shot.
I know I threw it at you, and we hadn't talked about it earlier. What do you think about my weird Winker theory with the Reds lineup? Do you think that's coincidental? Have you kind of looked at those numbers, and is it something they can pick up without him? I just found it fascinating that they're again, it could be coincidental, but they haven't played as well without him in the lineup, despite having Castellanos back and India and Votto. Stevenson is added a lot to their lineup. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, you would think with the emergence of India, because that was my first thought when you talked Winker. I mean, I love Winker. He's had a great year. You look at some of these MVP odds. I know we're going to get into that a little bit, and he's still kind of up there in that second tier of candidates just based on what he did in the first half of the season and before they lost him from the lineup. But yeah, it's kind of hard to figure, because if it was how they were rolling early in the season, when it was basically a two-man show between Winker and Castellanos, it would make a lot more sense. But like you said, India has been great. Joey Votto has been unbelievable. He's been the Votto of old. So it's kind of hard to figure how things have played there and to just pin it on Winker. But, he's not a guy that's dissimilar from what we talked about with Hoskins. He gives you some consistency in there and kind of trickles down throughout the lineup. So hard to say without watching him play every day. But, I mean, you have to point to it as a pretty significant factor in how things have played out for them.
What are you guys saying? I'm going to throw you another curveball here, because I thought of Eugenio Suarez.
Yep.
He and Cody Bellinger. Are they the two guys in baseball that people are going, what is going on with these two?
No, with all due respect to Suarez, who's had a great career and has had some great seasons, he's so far gone that I'm not even sure that's a conversation anymore. I think with Bellinger, It's still kind of a head scratcher. How can this guy be so athletic, and how can we still see flashes in a bad season? For me, he made a great play defensively the other night. I mean, I know it's mostly at the plate where his struggles have been, obviously, but he still can be an impact player. But Suarez is just almost a lost cause at this point. I mean, to me, he's kind of an afterthought. We had Jackie Bradley Jr. in this game with the Brewers and the Giants the other day, and he has the second lowest batting average ahead of Suarez. And to me, last year, looking at that type of production from Suarez, and as he started to trend in the wrong direction, there was some shock value to it. But now it's, you kind of expect to see Suarez with those kind of numbers. And it's hard to figure what happened with a guy who was one of the best power hitters in the game. I mean, some of those numbers that he put up in the second half of those seasons, I mean, his full season numbers were good too, but some of those runs he went on for 2 and 3 months at a time deep in seasons were as good as anything we've seen in recent memory. So it's hard to figure exactly what's happened with him. I think Bellinger, to me, has a better chance to get back to what he was. I mean, Suarez, I just haven't ever seen any signs in the last couple of years that he's anywhere close to figuring it out. At least with Bellinger, he's got that ridiculous athleticism to fall back on. Suarez doesn't exactly have that. And I don't think they did him any favors. I'm not saying it's the driving force, but just throwing him at shortstop, but he's completely ill-equipped to play the position while he was already in a tailspin offensively. That was a very curious decision to me for someone's psyche that they needed to get back on track.
Yeah, I agree. Well, let's go from the guys that aren't doing it to the guys who are. Last week, I talked to you about sort of my dark horse favorite, just only because nobody's talking about him. And I watch the Giants a lot, and I really think he's the glue, Brandon Crawford, as an MVP candidate. For me, if I were voting today, and all can change in a month, but if I were voting today, he would be my number one guy. And the other guy, I think, even though he may not be the best player on his team, I think he's been the most consistent start to finish. He's protected the guy who's probably their best player. And I think Austin Riley is an unsung hero, and I think a legitimate MVP candidate.
Yeah, I would agree with you that they're both definitely in the conversation. On the Giants side of things, Crawford's had an unbelievable season, and I think it's pretty interesting when you look at how it's all broken down. The first 3 months or so of the season, he was hitting for more power than he's ever hit for. I think he had something like 15, 17 home runs through June, a ton of RBIs. And then since the start of July, almost no power, but he has the best batting average in the league in that span. And he's also hitting well over 400 with runners in scoring position. So he's almost been two different players in the same season, which is kind of interesting. But the one thing I do I don't know about worry, but they could play a factor there with the Giants, and we've seen it in St. Louis before in Cy Young races, is it's hard to kind of separate when the three kind of old heads in that lineup that have been there forever are all having amazing seasons. Now, Crawford's having the best season of that three. I'm talking Belt, Posey, and Crawford. But they've all kind of played big roles in a similar sort of narrative around all of them. You know, the Giants not being expected to do much of anything. They're the guys that have been there forever that are getting back to that kind of championship pedigree that they had in 10, 12, and 14. So they've all got kind of similar stories. And then you just look at the overall depth of the lineup. Austin Slater led off the game with a home run yesterday, and now they've got 11 guys with 10-plus home runs, the most in franchise history. I mean, they've got the most home runs in the majors, and Chris Bryant leads the team if you include what he did in Chicago, and he's not even in the top – he's barely in the top 40 in the league in home runs. So they've been able to put together one of the most powerful offenses in the league through balance. And while I agree with you that Crawford, in the traditional sense of valuable, has maybe been the MVP, with the way the voting goes nowadays, I'm not sure if I'd take him necessarily as the electorate's ultimate choice, but I'm with you on his credentials for the purposes of this conversation. And then with Riley, you know, I think on the surface, it's sort of a similar situation, hard to separate him from Freeman, but you hit on the most important thing. He's done it all year. I mean, Freeman has been similar to Crawford, except not always productive. He's been a shell of his former self and the best we've ever seen of himself in the second part of the season. So, you know, on the surface, maybe they have similar cases. And I actually think if you look at the odds in Vegas, Freeman might be a tick ahead, which I find kind of curious. But I'm with you, watching the Braves a lot, and I get a chance to work with Mark DeRosa, who obviously is plugged in with the Braves and lives down there when he's not up in the studios working with us. And he's been singing Riley's praises all season long. And I think that Riley has really taken a step forward there to, you know, I know we're talking the 2021 MVP, but I think that he's made some changes there and played in a way where they feel really, really good that this is the guy he's going to be going forward. So, you know, I think you put all that together, and if I had to pick between those two, I think I'd lean Riley over Crawford, but it's a weird race for the NL MVP because Tatis is a heavy favorite.
Two more.
It's tough with him.
And if the Phillies take the division, or maybe even the wild card, Bryce Harper.
1,000%. That was gonna be my next guy. He's kind of slid in there as the second guy behind Tatis, and I think it's kind of human nature. Even if you look at everything and you decide Tatis has had the best season, I think it's just human nature to look at a guy who so clearly could have done more. I mean, partly not through his own fault. He's missed a ton of games. He's already missed 32 games, so the most he's going to play is 130, and he's leading the league in home runs. And we haven't seen that. I think once in the last 100 years, Dick Allen did it in less than 130 games, led his league in home runs. So, you know, Tatis obviously has had a great year, but I just think that when it comes time to vote, when guys look up and they see what happened with the Padres sliding in the second half of the season, and they see that he's missed, you know, 20% of the games, if not more, by the time we're done, people might have some hesitancy there. And like you said, if the Phillies keep surging, Harper's got the highest OPS in the majors. He's played at a high level, plays hard for that team. He could be a guy that's in that mix too. I know Max Muncy's another popular name for some reason. Good season. I don't see it. It's, you know, there's so much talent on that roster. I just have a hard time believing that voters are going to look up at the end of the season and Max Muncy's the reason that the Dodgers are what they are. I mean, they've got a million high-quality players, so I think he more plays his role to a T on that roster than really leads that roster.
So before we run out of time, as I was looking at the weekend schedule, and look, you and I agree, and every game's going to matter. But when you look at marquee value, I'm looking at the West Coast. There are two series to watch, one in LA and one in San Diego.
Yep, the one in LA is, you know, we touched on it earlier, saying how close that the Giants have played both these teams that were on their schedule this week. The Dodgers and Giants are 8-8 against each other, and they both scored 68 runs. I mean, it doesn't get any closer than that. The one, you know, if I want to nitpick, the pitching matchups aren't what they could be in that series this weekend, especially on the Giants side with what they've had to deal with, and just throwing Webb yesterday in their series finale. And the Dodgers a little banged up too. Scherzer having to come out of his start the other day, and obviously Kershaw's still down in the Bauer situation. So it's not those marquee, you know, playoff series type matchups that you're gonna see on the mound in Dodgers Giants, but that's not gonna matter. I mean, the two best teams in baseball, And obviously, there's teams with rich history. I was pretty shocked when I started looking at it that there's only been 2 seasons previously where they had the 2 best records in baseball. And there's only been one time where they met this late in the season with this good a record. I think it was 62 when they played that 3-game playoff series at the end of the year to break a tie in the league to go to the World Series. So, yeah, it doesn't get much better than this Giants-Dodgers matchup. And then Houston and San Diego, that's a good series too, but 2 teams that are kind of reeling a little bit here. I mean, Houston hasn't been shut out in 3 straight games in my lifetime, and they've been shut out in the last 2, so their offense can't get going. And then like we talked about with the Padres, they just can't get their starting pitching figured out. Their starting pitching has been atrocious these last couple of weeks. They won the series against Arizona this week, but lost on Wednesday in the series finale, and I took a quick look. The D-backs actually have a better record than the Padres since the break, so just can't get any traction out there in San Diego, but still an intriguing series to watch given where they are in the standings.
Yeah, 2 things about those clubs. One, Michael Brantley, when he came back from his injury, was pretty cold for a week or so. He's heating up. If he and Altuve can get going at the same time, I think that offense will be healed right away. But it's an if. Yeah. We don't know, but you like guys with track records. The other thing is with the Padres, they got Grisham back in there as Tommy Pham has faltered. And I think with him back at the top of the order, I know the Padres have been kind of shuffling things around game to game, but I think if they stick with Grisham at leadoff, I think they can right their ship. But that's all speculation, right?
Yeah, I'm with you, and I think you're right on Grisham there. I mean, it's kind of interesting. I think we might have touched on this previously once, but you look at what Grisham's done these last 2 years, he's basically put up the exact same numbers in a similar number of games that what Pham did with the Rays. So they thought they were getting one kind of player in Pham, but they doubled up and got a similar type of player in Grisham, and Grisham has actually asserted himself as the better player, basically putting up Pham-type numbers. So I'm with you. Getting Grisham back up there should help. And it's tough. I know we talked about it last week, but Tommy Pham, I mean, what the hell's happened there? It's hard to figure how he has gone the direction he's gone. But, yeah, Padres are looking for really any answers they can right now with the way things have played for them recently.
Exactly right. So what can we look forward to with MLB Network?
So the game that we're doing next week is Mets Yankees, which is always a fun series to cover, but it's on September 10th. So we'll have a pretty heavy, commemorative element to that broadcast, obviously, with 2 New York teams and the proximity to 9/11. So yeah, I wouldn't say that's necessarily a fun show to look forward to, but I'd like to think we'll do a good job with that. And I know Tom Bertucci's on that broadcast, who is as good as anybody at telling the stories, and obviously he's a New York guy. So we've got that. And then we've got a little break just for me personally in terms of our games until the end of the season, and we've got some great matchups lined up. Then Yankees Red Sox at the second to last weekend of the season, and then Yankees Rays on that last weekend. So I know the AL East looks like it's all but wrapped up, but who knows? Those two games could have big implications.
Absolutely could. Keith, as always, it's great visiting with you. Have a good Labor Day weekend. I'm sure, like me, you'll be watching the West Coast, and we'll visit again next week and see how the dust and smoke clears and where we're standing with everybody. I appreciate it.
Sounds good, Rammer. I'll talk to you then.
That is Keith Costas. I'm Bob Ramsey. Thanks for joining us here on Claibs Online and the Keith Costas podcast, and we'll see you next week.
Every day, Ameren, Illinois works to deliver reliable energy throughout the state to on-the-go families, in-the-know grandparents, and busy students. But did you know we also have ways to manage your energy? Paperless billing, outage notifications, pick a due date, auto pay, and so much more. So no matter who you are or how you use your energy, there's an option that's right for you. Learn more at amerenillinois.com/options.